Hey, welcome back to another episode of Stellar Origins, the podcast where we look at the past, the works of the beginnings of concepts of learning and development, and how they are today. How can we learn from those lessons to do better practices today? Today's episode is pretty awesome. I'm your host, Alex Salas, and we have an awesome guest as well. I've known this guy already over 8 years, I think. And it's been almost 8 years or more that I know this great guy. He's one of the most creative designers. I can't really put him in a label such as an instructional designer or a learning developer because he does it all. And he's also been really involved in carrying the flag for involving instructional comics, or the idea of instructional design supported by graphic novels and comics, anything around that realm. He's going to be able to tell us more about that. His name is Kevin Thorn. Kevin, welcome to Stellar Origins.
Hey, Alex, how's it going, everybody?
Great. Hope that introduction didn't do you justice, but you'll close it in.
Tell us too much.
You, man, and
I was listening to you talking. It's like, who are you talking about?
Yeah, you're expecting something like, when I was 3, I was inspired. Yeah, no. So, Kevin, how's it going today? What you've been doing lately? What do people?
Oh gosh,
what do people know you for?
What do they? I don't know. What do they know me for? Disrupting, making a lot of noise, causing problems.
Well, that's good.
No, yeah, just quick background. Like yourself, fellow veteran, I'm retired Army. Left the military, went and got an IT degree, started in corporate America in the IT world, if you will. That was going to be my new career after the military. That introduced me to the training, and like most accidental instructional designers, the quick plug for Cami, her second edition is pre-order right now by accidental instructional designer, and I fit that mold because in the IT, because we were building systems, for the company. And then part of my job was to train the technical help desk on how to use these systems. And the training manager at the time said, "Hey, you're pretty good at that training thing. Would you like to join our team?" So that's how I ended up in the training department. And as we get into this conversation, I've always been doodling and drawing cartoons and comics. I mean, everybody, I wouldn't say everybody, but most everybody grew up with comics at some level. And I'm no different from that, probably a little bit more than others. And when I got into the training department, there was this thing that happened. I didn't realize I've been a trainer my whole adult life because the military, I mean, you train constantly. And I never really consciously accepted the fact that I get this great satisfaction about teaching somebody something that I know how to do, and then they become as proficient. And I was doing that in the military. And then when I got in the training department, I realized kind of doing it, you're doing the same thing, just at a different level. And then all the technology, the geeky stuff, because, I had my IT degree and I was just fascinated with, back then, the .com era, the Y2K era, all that fascinating stuff that was going on. And, mobile devices were coming on the scene. It was I was a kid in a candy store. So if you take, my passion for training, my creative artist, drawing, comics, and my geeky technical side, learning and development it was like this intersection of all the things that I enjoy doing, as a career. And that's where it started. So I did that for about a decade or a little more. No, 15 years I was in that, decade and a half. And then I started freelancing, and that got really busy. So I quit the company and started my company, NuggetHeadz Studioz. And then wasn't long after that, just drawing and using my art talents, skills, whatever, and kind of putting them in my training designs is where I could get them to fit. And some projects wouldn't work, some it did, and I put different custom things in there, and that got attention to the point where I got one big um, project through the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, wanted a big digital story, a big interactive comic narrative story on HIV awareness. And I was like, okay, this is what I've been working for. This is the goal. This is what I've been wanting to do my whole adult career here. So we tackled that one, and as far as I know, the shelf life on that one was about 5 years, because they came to me 4 years after I developed it and wanted some updates. So I was pretty fascinating that they were still using it. And but that got some attention from other companies and other clients who came to me for different reasons on doing different comics. So I've done instructional comics, if you will, for the U.S. Navy, a couple of universities, American Pediatrics Association, more healthcare side. So that, and then right now I'm doing one for it's a combination between the Air Force and the Marines. Another instructional, educational comic, more of an onboarding type comic. And the interesting thing about going through and building all these projects with this comic sort of format is it started getting me to think that there's more power to this medium than just another output. Because I was introduced to several challenges where traditional e-learning wouldn't work, especially when we get international, get into third world countries and low resource settings, and how do we get information? I did a comic for Cisco one time that we ended up doing it in a print, like an analog print, but we also converted it to an interactive PDF that they could run on their iPad. So I started thinking, it's like, okay, we could do quite a bit with this interactive stuff, the hypercomic stuff. And that just led me to a focus that I want to write about this stuff. And fast forward, a guy by the name of Nick Susanis, who is a comics professor at the University of California right now. When he was going through his PhD in his dissertation, he actually drew his dissertation as a graphic novel.
Oh, wow.
And Harvard Publishing published the book for him. And that was like, okay, I want to do that. I want to, the whole meta thing, right? I want to write a dissertation about educational comics, but I want to draw it as a graphic novel, the dissertation. Now, I haven't drawn it yet. I'm still writing it. I got to get past the writing part and get the dissertation published, and then I'll go back and start tackling the task of drawing. But that really just kind of took my brain to another level. It's like, okay, how can I do that? And at the time when I had that, I only had my undergrad. I had my IT degree. That's all I had. When I say that's all I had, that was the level of postgraduate education or post high school education I had. And in order to write a dissertation, I needed a master's degree. It's like you have to have that first before I can get into a doctoral program. So when I went in my master's, I wrote my master's thesis on instructional comics, which then got attention of the school, who said, "Okay, we want you to go into a whole different conversation." But the school said, "You've got a very interesting case here, and we'd love to have you in our doctoral program." So in the meantime, I started another comic that was funded by the Gates Foundation to reduce infant mortality rates worldwide. And how do we do that with a comic in multiple languages in low fidelity, low resource, low literacy regions of the world? And bam, there's the answer. There is no other medium that can do that than a comic. And I'll go to my grave on that claim, because when we talk about low literacy, low resource, low technology, low fidelity, there's no other medium in our world in learning development you can do that without, unless you just write a paragraph. I mean, you can write a document, but then we get into that low literacy thing. If I can't read and I don't have, if I don't know how to read, then writing instruction in a paper and sending it out as a PDF isn't going to help either. But sequential narrative storytelling, when you can put instruction in a visual narrative without words, now you've got a powerful medium to work with.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting thing, because when I hear you talk about this, and as we sort of discussed before we started recording, there's a very rich history with the use of comics, and there are some distinctions to make, obviously, that I'm going to ask you about in terms of, graphic novel, comic type of thing like that. Are we talking about the same thing? Is it a different thing? What it is? But the interesting thing, going back in this and looking at just the regular sources that I use, Scholar, Google Scholar, the archives, and whatnot. There's notion, obviously, of, and there are websites out there. Google is also an option. There's a website out there, illustrationhistory.org, and they mentioned sort of like as the comic genre, let's say the comic book, right? Because we have to sort of make all these differences. We have sort of a comic strips that start in papers, and we have comic, let's say, like the single shots, right? The single caricatures and stuff that get published in the 1800s. So those were visual communication items. It's still a visual communication item, but I think when we look at comic in the discussion that we're having as instructional comics now, it becomes instructional media, right? So when does it become instructional media? Those will be the interesting explorations. But the beginning of things seems to be this book, The Yellow Kid in McFadden's Flats, 1897.
Yeah.
And we'll put a link on the episodes here, the episode descriptions. You can also get this, folks, in the LinkedIn newsletter, publishes every week, just with this podcast as well. And so we have that as the medium. Let's say it was an interesting fact about this comic, Kevin, is that it was so popular that it had to be done in two different newspapers at the same time, and there were two different artists drawing it or something. That seems quite the, let's say, the exponential popularity of it. But you mentioned something else. You mentioned something to me before. Tell me a little bit about that. That there was some kind of instructional or a comic set for educational purposes that was only sold for a penny or something.
Yeah, that was 1898, early 1900s. He was doing a comic back then. You heard of the funny pages, right? The funny papers.
Right, the funny pages, yeah.
Well, that's the origin of the word comic. I mean, that's where it came from, because it was, cartoon strips in papers, so they called them the funny pages. And the funny pages back then, when you bought a newspaper, you didn't have kids didn't have the money to go buy it, right? So he wanted to, it was more of an entrepreneurial kind of endeavor. It's like, well, how do I write funny pages where I can make money, because kids don't have money? So he wrote it for adults. Specifically, the language, the story, the characters, everything was geared toward an adult audience, and he sold it for one penny, and I believe it was, I don't know, maybe 2 pages, open, like one page folded in half, so 4 pages front back. And it took off, right? So that was sort of your first adult comic. um, geared towards an adult audience.
Okay.
And then it's kind of squishy over the next couple decades because the genre kind of took off, and then we've got the golden years of comics and all that, and the
Right.
um,
Same here. 1933. You got funnies on parade, and that sort of set the format, or like let's say the standard comic size book. You know that we know now from 1938. Superman comes out, right, and forget it after that.
well, that I mean that whole era right there, the 30s and the 40s, the golden era. I mean, there was I mean all of the comic heroes that we know, you know, like the Stan Lees and Jack Kirby's and all those. I mean, they were literally pumping out comics in Manhattan. They were all just DC Comics and Detective Comics and Marvel, and I mean these. I mean, we can go into that whole history.
Oh no, no, yeah,
Uh,
of course.
but that was that era right there. But during that time, Will Eisner was also a formidable artist and storyteller. Um, and again, we can go down his path on why he didn't join one of the big comic houses at the time, and he kind of stayed. But he was also a journalist. And then when he was in the army, he was in publications. He was in as a journalist in the military, and he started writing comics for the Stars and Stripes newspaper in the military, and that led to an educational comic called Preventive Service Monthly, which was a little magazine. When we call it a magazine, it was just a booklet, maybe 16-page booklet that was a comic that instructed the soldier on how to take care of their equipment, everything from their weapons to their radio equipment to their vehicles, any piece of equipment that was part of your arsenal. It doesn't matter what, if you're an engineer, if you're infantry. He had this huge library that he would write these monthly magazines on how to take care of your equipment in a comic format. Now, this was analog, obviously, back then, printed little book.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was stationed in Europe. It's the first time I saw them. I've been in the Army maybe 2 or 3 years. First time I saw one. And I was fascinated by it, and I started collecting them. Right, every month they would get one. I'd be first in line to get one. And I brought home when I left Europe and I came back home in transition to my next duty station. I had a cardboard box full of them, and I put them in my childhood home. And then I left and went on to my next duty station, always knowing they were there. But years later, when I went back home to get them, I asked my boss, I said, what happened to that box of cards? She goes, oh, I thought you didn't want them anymore. I sold them in a yard sale. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So anyway, but he's got a few quotes. It was so ahead of his time because even back in 1944, 45, if you don't pay attention to the comic genre, you're missing out on a powerful medium for educating adults. It's not just for children. And the problem, the stigma that comics had, especially in the 60s and 70s, when we started having a lot of the horror comics and the noir comics, different things like that, that started, the big book burning era. We're going to burn the comics because, they were bad for our children.
Yeah.
And the comics were worse than Elvis Presley, right? In terms of, taking our kids down the wrong path. So anytime we think of the word, any today, if you go up to anybody who's not, thoroughly educated in the world of comics, and you ask them what comes to mind when you think of comic, when I ask you, what do you think of when I say the word comics? Generally, most people are going to refer to Batman, Superman, Marvel comics and all that, right? Because that's all the association they have with it. But then fast forward into the 90s when Scott McCloud wrote his book, Understanding Comics. He starts in his book early on. Let's define comic. Let's define what it is first. Yeah. And he defines comics as sort of this umbrella. Think of a genre where comic is the medium, and then the format Could be a comic book, could be a comic strip, could be a graphic novel, could be an infographic. It could be the safety pictorial guide in the pocket of your airline seat is considered part of the comic genre, because comic is just a medium. It's just a way of communicating visually. And then there's all these different formats underneath that. And the one that we're most familiar with, obviously, is the Marvel comics and, the DC comics and things like that.
Yeah, I was mentioning that also just to paying attention that we have all these different genres that sort of seem to converge in the same this visual communication, as you say. We found another paper which is called Instructional Comics and Instructional Methods, and this is when kind of things start getting kicked up, 40s, 50s, 60s. But it covers, it confirms that the first comic magazine in that paper, it says it's published in 1935 per se, and whatever that means, comic magazine, right? There was this book that that I was telling you about by Linda Ward. Was a American artist, and it's called God's Men, and published in 1929, and is a series. Essentially, it seems like a series of wooden plates, so wood edgings, no text whatsoever. So the full story is visual. That will be very interesting to kind of check out and see if there's a possibility to see the full, the full book. I'm pretty sure it's available somewhere, but what I found so far only has a few pages, and it's pretty interesting. It's super interesting because it leaves so much to interpretation, to what those visuals bring out of you.
Well, that's what we're talking about now, or what you're introducing, is the theoretical nature or theoretical structure underneath communicating visually. Comic is just a format. It's just a medium, an output. But before we choose a pen and paper and start drawing pictures, we have to have the structure. We have to have the design. So how do you instructionally design a comic? It's not just doing instructional design and, let me just grab some comic graphics to put with my content. Yeah. That's not, instructional comic design or instructional visual design.
Well,
so then we look at that.
So that's a good conversation, because it's like, well, I've seen comics, so
well, think of let's break it down. Think of
gaslighting a little here for you. so you're saying that's not it. That sounds like a LinkedIn it sounds like a LinkedIn post discussion, right? Like, that's not it. And then some people are gonna get on you and be like, why are you gatekeeping? I can't PowerPoint and make a nice, beautiful comic.
I'll challenge them with that all the time. They can call it a comic, but then it's just an uneducated approach, right? So
no, I get that part.
My weakness right now.
Why is that? What are you thinking in terms of design? Like, if you were going to ask me, how do you make instruction and stuff like that, I'm going to take them to Addy, right? And if they say, well, I'm using something else, okay, well, great, but what part of that? In what part of this are you doing this part, right? So in your sense, it seems to me there are some theories out there we don't know about.
Oh, yeah. Oh, heck yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we look at visual language, forget comics for a minute. Just forget it for a minute.
Right.
If we look at visual language, then look at our own written language. So let me take you down memory lane for a minute. So think back when you're 4 or 5 years old and you're learning how to write your name, right? So in the Arabic language, the Western alphabet, the 26 characters and all its glyphs, if we look at the history of where they came from, they were just symbols. And each symbol has a phonetic sound to it, but also a graphic meme on what it looks like, the letter A, the letter B, C, so forth, so on. So before we were able to communicate, we had to learn how to write each one of those glyphs, one letter at a time. Remember, practice writing your alphabet, right? And then as we progressed, we learned how to combine different glyphs together to form words. We're still not communicating. Now we're just creating words. You know, you remember the word list, like all the 4-letter words, you have to go practice writing it. The 3-letter words, then the 4-letter words, then the 5-letter words. I remember those vocabulary homework assignments. It's a nightmare even today when I think about it. Then after we learn all the words, then we start putting words together and forming sentences to where we can now communicate. And then we go on further and we learn grammar and structure and then storytelling and all these other things. So Neil Cohn, the visual language theory, he argues that individual images or sequential images, they all exist in our memories, and it's organized using the same structures and principles of language. So if we take a glyph, well, let me see. So let me give you an example. If I picture this in your mind, if you can,
Mhm.
if an image of a silhouette of a tree with one leaf, like it's blowing off, like the last leaf is coming off the tree, right? Can you imagine that? What that looks like?
Yeah.
Okay, and then that's it. There's no words. And then the second picture is a close up of a hot beverage, like a cup of coffee, and you see like steam lines coming off the top of the cup of coffee. So now we've got this sort of picture of a tree outside, the last leaf falling off. We got a close up picture of a coffee cup. And then the third image, we see somebody holding the coffee cup close with a big warm smile on their face as they're drinking the cup of coffee. What does that say? What does that communicate? There's no words, but we can interpret a story out of those 3 images by simply saying, on a cold autumn morning, a cup of coffee really hits the spot. Or the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air with a warm and inviting mood, although it was a dreary and cold autumn day.
Right. So before we had those, we used visual metaphors, right? So your visual metaphors kind of
Well, metaphors are a little bit different. Metaphors aren't distinct. I mean, so if I have a picture of a cup of coffee, the cup of coffee is a cup of coffee.
Mhm.
The metaphor is, how do I interpret that cup of coffee to mean something else other than a cup of coffee?
Right. But as you're in creative writing, though, if you're describing it with such richness, as you mentioned richness, right? So if I look at a cup of coffee, I'm not going to be able to tell you whether it's rich.
That's storytelling. I mean, but let's take that same example and think of pictograms. And I mentioned the airline safety card that we all have, and when we take our flights.
Isn't that considered a job aid?
Do I consider it a job aid?
Yeah, is it not a job aid? What that
Sure, but is it not instructional, informative, educational? Is it universal to where I don't have to know one particular written or verbal language in order to interpret those pictograms in sequence? Remember, look back at the theory. The visual language theory is sequential images that communicate.
Mhm.
So I'm communicating through a sequential series of images. That's what an airline safety card is doing. And that graphic or that card or those fit under that comic umbrella that Scott McCloud defined for us.
Okay.
Right. So I can be a Chinese Mandarin. I can be French Canadian. I can be any other language. I can speak and write any other language. But universally, if I look at that safety card, I can understand it. I can read it. How to open the exit door. How to use my oxygen mask. All of those things. So that's probably probably the simplest and easiest examples to tie in what is visual language theory. And it's how to tell a story or how to communicate whether it's telling a story, whether it's instructing, whether it's educating, whether it's whether it's an awareness campaign. Let's do that for a minute. Let's go down that with the awareness campaign when we talk about how do we change behavior with comics on a global scale. And we just did it a couple of years ago. Most people don't even know what happened. I mean, everybody knows what happened, but we don't. Let me put it this way. Think about all of the public spaces that we started going to in 2020. And we started seeing posters and billboards and different things. Social distancing, wash your hands, wear your mask. All of those little pictograms that started appearing, these new graphics, these new glyphs started appearing about how to do things and how to behave. And so you go in the subway, you see them. You go in the airport, you see them. You go in a bathroom, you see these signs. Or you'll see a poster when you walk into a store with the big board that walks in. So you got to have a mask, social distance. Make sure you wash your hands.
I get what you're saying in that. The only thing is, that's only effective. I think the most effective part of that would be in the same instance that we experience learning is exposure frequency, right? So
Sure.
me taking the sub,
change behavior.
Me taking the sub every day and seeing that post. And
I would love to do a study.
Yeah.
And how many people's behavior actually changed over time because of that frequency,
or
due to that visible in your face
reinforcement,
right? And they could look different. I mean, if you look at the style, and this is a great example, the style of one image with a mask might be a different style with wear a mask, or might be a different style with, right? But it's all communicating the same thing.
Yeah.
So I've seen the social distancing. We see two footprints, like 2 footprints here, 2 footprints here, a dotted line in between with 6 feet.
Right.
So I can look at that. It's like, oh, that means I need to stand here and somebody else needs to stand over here.
Yeah.
But
I think in other countries, just so people use something that people knew was 6 feet or $1.80 m. Right?
Yeah. Well, how they communicated it was
as a reference. Yeah. So the important is that you transmit that message. The interesting thing, though, is we're not all the same, and some people don't get the message, right?
No, and it's not a good fit for everything. I'm glad you brought that up because, and I can't think of it. There's a couple of friends that we know that, when you say, think of an apple, it's not. I don't want to call it a condition. It starts with an A. I can't think what it is right now. But anyway, if I say think of an apple, you literally cannot visualize an apple. You have to have it in front of you. It's like, oh yeah, I know that's an apple. But if you take that away from your focal vision, then you lose it in your mind, and there's no way you can't recall what it looks like unless it's in front of you.
That's interesting though, because I tend to cling to images for a lot of things. So when I write stuff, that's why I probably am a very slow reader. Is I like to visualize everything. So when I read, he went through it was a castle and it had 3 towers.
Yes, so you're a great candidate for reading comics.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, and if we look back, everybody can check the links in the episode. It's a good conversation, but obviously there've been teachers, as any other instructional media, that have been people that kind of have gone or studied this in a specific case, a context, and then find not so favorable results. So a couple of papers I found out there where people tested specifically for reading comprehension. And it almost feels to me, it's like anything else in academia, something new comes out or a new idea, let's say, right? Because comics are not new, but the idea of using it in the classroom for better this and that. Interesting. It brings out the situation you mentioned before with someone that has, low literacy. They did better in that sense. But then on those 2 papers, they also saw it as a trivial difference, not a significant difference or statistics difference in the sense of reading comprehension. The time spent looking at things or looking at the books perhaps was a little longer with comic books. And I guess you can attribute that to, the visuals and whatever the case. But the other part is that those two studies or those two papers and studies were pretty much based on kids, so children or teenage, 10, 12, third grade, fourth grade, something like that. So I find that I'm not surprised about finding anything like that though, because you can find pretty much when it comes to research, you can find people that seem to just be looking at how does it do not where does it not work and where does
right.
But in your perspective, the interesting thing you're doing or the interesting thing you're doing in terms of your research is the digital comics, right? And so we attribute digital comics specifically to the internet, with the birth of the internet, or do we have anything like that before that?
Well, let's go back to the 80s. Digital storytelling started at UC Berkeley. And now it's called Story Center, I think storycenter.com. But digital storytelling was a way Ian Williams kind of created this workshop in a way to help people basically tell their story. So the less fortunate, the marginalized folks that were having a hard time, how do I communicate, or how do I express my emotions, and how do I get out what I'm feeling? I can't, I'm not a good writer. I'm not a good talker, right? So how do I express it? So he created this digital storytelling, which teaches people, basically it's a workshop where you use a mixed media, right? So you go take video of yourself, or you get pictures and things like that, and you create this sort of video. That's how it started, but the principles of that are specifically towards video and not necessarily, well, not at all. And you can use comics, but it's more about creating a video. And they're usually 2 to 3 minute short videos. And it started with, in the theater area around Oakland, San Francisco, the UC kind of Berkeley area. And so he created that. And then later, a guy by the name of Robin came out and said, well, we can leverage digital storytelling, the principles of what it is, and let's move it into the classroom for educators to use digital storytelling as a tool for teaching children, where children would get assignments, or the teacher would assign the student, build a story, tell me about, like, so if their topic was about learning some historical figure or some other, the inner workings of a plant, all the biology side of it, then the assignment would be to create a digital story to tell me about what you've learned. So it opens up that critical sort of creative thinking, instead of just writing a paper about it, or doing the old trifold science boards where you take pictures and you put them up and you do a show and tell.
Yeah.
Digital storytelling is actually you're creating an artifact you can share beyond the classroom. And so we take the origins of digital storytelling. We take Robin's work where he moved it into the classroom for more educational digital storytelling. He's got some new principles there. And then what's missing, the gap, and that's where I'm trying to fill in, is how do we take digital storytelling, the principles of what it is, how do we make it interactive? And how do we make it not necessarily video as the only single output? Because Williams and Robin's principles and how the whole digital storytelling started was all about video. Your end output will be a video. Where Ian had 7 principles, Robin added a few more, up to 12 principles.
Okay.
And
go ahead, finish that thought. Yeah.
No, what I'm trying to do is extend that or expand it to say digital storytelling could be any output. It could be it could be e-learning, it could be interactive, it could be video, it could be animation, it could be a comic, a digital comic. It could be a game. It could be a digital game comic or educational game. And there's several really great comic game examples as well. And that fits under that digital storytelling. So if we break down that whole structure, right, we've got digital storytelling as the structure, the principles of digital storytelling. And then we've got the visual language theory, which follows the same grammatic structures as written language. And then those inform each other in order to then let's explore comics as a medium in educating and instructing and informing. So we've got this theory that can inform both digital storytelling and the comics medium. But then where my work is, my research and my work is trying to expand on that is how do we take digital, interactive, sequential narrative storytelling using comics and then combine it all together. So the work that I've done, actual projects, actual big comics that I've done, I didn't know that that's what they were when I was building them. And I look back and I was like, holy cow, this is exactly the output of what I'm now defining as the structure on how to do that. So I didn't know how to do it when I was doing it, but I did it. But now I've got evidence and research and all the stuff that informs and how to do it more structurally. So part of this whole journey is I've got a couple new models I'm working on. Got a new list of principles to expand on that digital storytelling. I'm tinkering with the visual language theory, with all due respect, the Cohn's work on how that applies outside of language and how it applies to education. There's going through this journey is basically exploded my brain into a whole bunch of different directions.
Yeah, he put in, Dale definitely put in some good work in terms of artificial instructional media, and leading to all of this. But how do you, so in essence, right now, it seems like a lot of it has existed there, and I guess it just needs that narrowing channel.
Yeah, part of research, right? So, like you were mentioning, PhD. Part of research is a large part of it is find what's already there, what's out there, what's already been done,
right?
And that's an enormous amount of reading. I can't, man, thousands of articles in the last couple of years I've read,
right?
And it's funny, when I first started, one of my early professors says, before you're done, you will read 2,000 plus research articles before you're done. And I was like, that just blew my mind. I was like, I immediately got overwhelmed, intimidated. It's like, I'm like you, I'm not a big reader. It takes me a month to read a book because I can't just sit and read a book cover. I've got to take it little small bites at a time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how am I going to read that many articles, like kind of thing? And now I look back and I look at my library of all the articles I've collected and tagged and whatever and used. And now that I can actually recall and cite, and I'm looking back, it's like, holy cow, I actually did read that many. And you don't think about it when you
yeah, it's true. That makes the difference between people that, have done the research and people that haven't.
Well, man, going back to what you're asking, you have to find out what's existing, what's already there.
Yeah.
And then your work is, how do I fill the gap? Where can I contribute to that body of literature?
So e-learning, e-learning seems to sort of touched on this, and we're not depending on the designer, obviously. But, the notion of the animated pedagogical agents, which comes around the 90s, which, leads to the whole using of characters and e-learning authoring tools, meaning that in that angle too, and this could be an interesting one, right? Because of comics in general, they tend to be, not that they couldn't be, but in most cases, it tends it tends to put the viewer on a third person basis, almost,
It
right?
can.
You're looking at,
That's design, but it
yeah, it
can.
doesn't always happen. I'm saying you can make it whatever it is, but I'm saying in terms of like the notion, the general notion, if you say, hey, comics, you're seeing something happening between two forces or whatever the case or whatever the journey is. The difference, I guess, instructionally could be as you do with animated pedagogical agents, right? APAs, which is like that person, that character can be a supported character to the learner, as an instructor, as a peer, or as a rookie, right? So some
Yeah,
those are different experiences depending on in when you're learning. Because you can have somebody be like, "Hey, thanks you're here because I need help," right? And and I was like, "Can you tell me which way to go here or whatever?" As opposed to, "Hey, good to see you. I've been waiting for you. I've been doing this for 20 years. Let me tell you where to go," right? So it's a whole different experience from that perspective. If you turn that into a comic, into a digital comic, what are the requirements of a digital comic though? Do you have to draw or can
no,
you aggregate?
no. Think again. Let's use a comparison to video. If I'm an instructional designer and I'm writing a course on diversity and sexual harassment, there's something like that, right? And I'm writing scenarios, right? So here's how not to behave, and then here's how to behave. So I'm writing, writing the
Yeah.
here's the how not to behave. Let's look at that, and then what should Alex do? What should he do? That kind of thing. You've seen those
Yeah, yeah, of
those
course.
structures,
Or
right?
you don't have to even go that way. You could just put it as okay, make a decision and you got your
Yeah,
pattern.
but think about where we're at with that right now. That's just design. I'm just writing
Right.
the instructional design, right?
Yeah.
The output, I could write it in such a way that it could be a live action video,
Right.
but I'm not going to be the actor. I'm not going to be the videographer. I'm not going to be the sound engineer. I'm not going to be the post production video editor. I'm just writing it, designing it, and then I'm going to either hire contractors to do the development work. I'm going to go hire actors. I'm going to go find a set design somewhere and set it up.
Okay.
And none of that is my skill set. None of that is my talent. So the same thing and there's another great article by Neil Cohn who wrote the actual article is called "I Can't Draw," and it's a research article on why people seem to think that I can't draw. So when we introduce instructional comics or digital comics for e-learning or however we want to do it, and a lot of times I'll get the same reaction. I say, "Well, I can't draw." I said, "All right, when's the last time you did a live action video where you were the main actor in a scenario?" And you go find the talent to do the work. So if you want to design an instructional comic, then design it and then go find an artist to draw it.
Yeah, and in that respect too, though, just to challenge a little more of that thought that you have in there, because basically we're discussing the I think in most cases we're discussing the life of an instructional designer that works for a vendor, right? Or a government contract where things are specialized. This one person does the analysis, the other one does the writing, the other one does that.
Yeah,
In most cases, working in corporate, instructional designers are assigned to one project and they do the
that's
whole
right.
thing.
Yep.
So, uh, based on the model that you describe, which is kind of like what I call the vendor or the government model, right? Because of the size of the project, the I mean, you don't even have to be the writer if you're the instructional designer, because you're going to
No.
be focusing on the instructional pieces, which is the specific experience, the levels of learning.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover though because
Uh-huh.
um,
Well, what I mean is you can have a writer, right? Give it
you
the
could. I mean, like the projects I've done on mine. I mean, I did soup to nuts. I mean, I was everything from
right. Me too. I mean, that's the life.
analysis to design, and I did all the artwork too.
And
I
it's
did all the
fun.
drawing too.
Yeah, and I know
So I
you.
know I'm in a unique situation where I have the skill and the talent to draw, or I can see while I'm designing, I can see and map out a scenario, and I can write it like a screenplay almost. Like here's the setting, and here's the camera angle, and here's how I want it to look, and then go to the drawing board and actually draw those scenes out And then, okay, well, this scene I want to be animated a little bit, or I want this to be an interactive component. So being able to kind of think ahead or kind of forecast or foreshadow while you're designing is a huge benefit.
Yeah.
So when you have these two talents or these two skills separated, where I'm just going to design and then toss it over the fence and then you go put it together, a lot of times that doesn't. I mean, it works when you're pumping out a lot of quick stuff, but when you want to do something a little bit more involved, there's got to be a iterative, collaborative effort with everybody involved in order to make sure you're not missing it.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, um, as you know, I'm now the new director of development for Artisan E-Learning, which goes to your point. Now, in this role, there is separate designers and separate developers. It's not one person owning the whole project. And what we're working on now is bringing those two, take the fence down and bring those back together, and let's get the developer early on in that analysis design phase, and then carry the designer into the development phase, even though they're done designing it, carry them into the development phase so they can see how their work is coming together.
Yeah.
But what we're finding is that on that early front end, we're able to look at different ideas in terms of storytelling, um, sequential narrative, interactive activity, things like that, that designers may not be aware of what they can do from a developer's point of view. And where a
Right.
developer says, oh, yeah, we can do that. Oh, yeah, we can do that. But they're only going to do what's been designed. But yet there's not this cross. So we're finding some really great epiphanies of like, holy cow, that's awesome. We can do that.
Yeah.
And but the comic piece of that, when you start introducing comics, like you said, first person, third person, and this is part of one of the other models I'm working on. It doesn't have to be there doesn't have to be a humanoid character. There
Right.
doesn't have to be dialogue between that. You can flip the perspective of a story and tell it from a completely different angle or a different, uh, almost like an anamorphic kind of character. To give you an example, I was talking to a client recently on security awareness, security. What's that? Just
Yeah. Cybersecurity or security.
cybersecurity. Yeah, that genre or that topic. And we got talking about ransomware and phishing and viruses and all these different things. And if you go out and look, there are quite a few um, compliance-driven type cybersecurity awareness training that's done in that comic format, but it's the same dry. All due respect, it's just content and some attractive graphics.
Yeah.
But there's no story, right?
So it's a hack.
There's scenarios, but there's no story.
So it's a hack.
So one of the ideas is to flip the story on its head and tell it from the perspective of the virus. And I draw from Finn in Star Wars, who was the stormtrooper. Who I don't want to be a stormtrooper anymore. I don't like the Empire. They're doing bad things. I want to go help the rebels.
Yeah.
Or the cause or whatever. So take that story and convert it to there's a virus going to virus school, and they're all excited about graduating virus school and going and infecting computers. But that one virus saying, I don't want to be a virus. That's mean. I don't want to do this. And he changes and he becomes the hero to fight off his friends that he just went to school with to knock these other viruses out of the game. So you're telling the story completely away from me clicking on an attachment in my email, and we're telling a story from inside the computer about these viruses and the rivals between them, and how does this one lone virus who's changed its mind, I don't want to be the bad guy, and how do I knock all of these other ones out of this computer? And telling that story in that perspective is more engaging, more attractive, more interactive. Um, and but then you draw it up like a comic, but then the comic medium itself is relatable. I can relate to the learner more directly than I can with any other medium. I can transcend time and space, meaning I can go inside a computer and tell a story from the backside coming out of the screen. You can't do that with video. I can create an environment that doesn't exist that you can't do with video. Think of Avatar, the new Avatar movie. Think of the environment in Avatar and the hundreds of millions of dollars it took to create that environment. I can create an environment out of nowhere and put it in e-learning, and it takes a weekend because all we need is a creative idea and a pen and paper, and then production and all that. But I mean, the idea and the design of the idea doesn't take that long to come up with.
Yeah.
Then the output and all that. So anyway, I'm running down a rabbit hole. Sorry.
No. That's great, man. Listen, Kevin, this has been an awesome conversation. I hope everybody else had the
yeah, thanks, man.
Appreciate it. I learned many things here talking to you about this, and obviously and the research involved, and yeah, so many opportunities there, so many different avenues, and a lot of I would even say some overlaps that we have in the way of looking at what comics can do in the creation and the creative process and how it affects instructional design. So thank you for being here and doing this episode, Kevin. What's going on with you? I'm pretty sure, isn't it time to step away or something? Is that happening? But I know.
Yeah, we're still doing that. We're reimagining. Reimagining.
Yeah. Explain what step away is, because I don't
know. Step away is exactly what it means. It's step away from the noise. It's a creative thinking, immersive exercise using game design as the vehicle to solve a problem. And we were doing it face to face, but then COVID hit and that kind of disrupted everything. So then we went virtual the last couple of years, and that worked out really well. So we're kind of reimagining what we can do this year. Right now, we're planning around September. Well, I haven't got some dates yet, but if you struggle with solving problems, learning problems, and you're looking for creative ways to do that, then we go through a series of activities to teach you how to. We're teaching creative thinking. Oh, essentially, we use game design as a vehicle to kind of teach that.
Awesome. So, well, thanks for that, Kevin. Great talking to you, my friend, and everybody else. You can hear us again on the next episode of Style of Origins every Sunday. See you later.